You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
We're going to be talking to Chris Lamb live in the studio from the Kent Architecture Centre. Chris, firstly, it's great to have you here in the studio.
It's great to be here, Daniel. Thank you for asking me.
Now, I was wondering if we could start off by you sort of introducing yourself a little bit and also refreshing our listeners on the Kent Architecture Centre.
Yeah, of course. I'd be delighted. I started life training as an architect some time ago now, I've got to say. But more recently, I'm passionate about the quality of our places and our architecture and our parks and such, and you know, what makes people tick, what makes them like a certain place and not like another place, what makes a good building, how do we tell what a good building is. You know, all these things are fantastic questions and very rich. And I started off managing an architecture centre up in Yorkshire. I was teaching at Greenwich University for some time, always in architecture. And then moved to the Kent Architecture Centre about 4 years ago and became director of that organisation, a fantastic organisation, been going for many years now. Started off working in North Kent, then worked really across Kent. Now we work across the southeast. But as you can see from what we're doing tonight, really, I'm passionate about working locally as possible.
Well, I was hoping that if you could just expand on what you were hoping to sort of cover in this evening's show.
Well, I guess it's almost what we won't cover because there's such a lot to talk about. But what I really want to understand more and kind of get a debate going is about what do we think is good and bad about the places that we live, work and play in. And from that, what do we do about changing them, and how can we get involved in changing them? So it's really trying to test the temperature of what people think about Swale and Kent. You know, what are its high points, and I guess people might want to talk about some of its low points. What do they think of contemporary architecture, modern housing? You know, we look across the water, we see some amazing stuff going on in places like Holland and things, and we know that we've got some challenges to deal with, and how are we going to deal with them? Will our houses look the same in 20 years as they do now? Probably not, but what will they look like? It's those kind of questions, really, that I'm looking to tease out if I can.
One of the ones that came into me was from Darren, and he was asking, should we sort of stick with old architecture or just kind of forget that, pull it down and build new stuff that's appropriate to today?
It's a good question. It's a great question, actually. I think the reality is with older, valuable buildings, but then I guess the other question is, how do we work out what's valuable and what isn't? But buildings, I don't know, like for instance a church that's disused, it's fallen into disuse because the congregation's not there anymore or whatever, but it's a loved building, that is so worth finding a new use for, and you know, finding a new way of extending its life, I guess, and giving it a new lease of life, because in doing that you not only enrich the building, but you enrich the community in which that building is, and you make it part of that community again. So I think in those kind of cases, it's really a no-brainer. We've got to find new ways of using older buildings and bringing them back into life. I'm sure for a lot of people, when they see a beautiful old building that's going into rack and ruin, you know, they find it doesn't lift the spirits, and I think buildings ought to lift the spirits. And with that in mind, of course, some older buildings, they don't quite have the kind of quality that necessarily makes you want to love them or whatever. And I think in those cases, we've got to have faith in our new architecture, in our new design, to say, actually, this probably is time to try something new, try and find a new use for this site, for instance, that could make better use of it and make it a better place to be. So there's no one answer, but I think the default is quite often, if quality is there, we should try and find a new use for it without any shadow of a doubt. If the quality isn't there, we can then think, well, how do we make this a better place, more enjoyable, you know, and then look at ways in which we could maybe integrate the old into the new, because actually quite a lot of this is about a search for character and a sense of place. And of course, it's often in our older buildings that we get that feeling of sense of place. But I really do believe that we can get that in new architecture too, and new design.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things I quite like is new and old architecture. People always say, oh, you can't change that. But I quite like it when you have a completely modern extension to a piece, or you go into an old building, which probably thinking of it, the Chatham Dockyard have done that in some areas. It's an old building on the outside, but inside it's been completely redone. I quite like that idea as well.
I think you're right. One of the key well, I guess one of the key buildings now, because it's such high profile, is number 1 Smithery in the Dockyard, where you've got a beautiful old building that really was in trouble, actually, a few years ago. It really was in trouble. But pretty much everything that's gone into the building is obviously of its time. You know, the new galleries and such, they're obviously very contemporary. And as you said, the old and new works very well together. I think that the thing is, when you work, I mean, this is my view, and it's definitely probably just my view. The reality is, when you work with an older building, I think it respects it more to make the difference between the old and the new really clear. So I think that's why it works for you, because you almost get a tension between the two. And I don't mean tension in a bad way, I mean tension in a good way. You can really tell what's old and new, and you can really work and get the most out of the modern to complement the older. It doesn't have to look the same, and I think that's very important, because then you just can't tell what's what. And is that really respecting the older building? Well, I don't think it is as much.
Well, one of the things I know you wanted to cover, and actually we're hoping you sort of contact us as well with this, is what is your favourite building in Kent, or even Swale?
Well, I'm going to pick. It's strange because it actually builds on that last question we were just talking about. I'm going to pick one that is very obviously a modern addition to a much loved older building. It's Maidstone Museum. That you know, for many people, it's these kind of 2 gold boxes floating in the air. But in a sense, it's given. I think it's done a number of things. It's a real cultural kind of talking point as an object in Maidstone. But once you actually get around the building, you begin to use it, you go inside it, it actually works incredibly well as well. And it does that great thing, I think, of bringing a bit of order to what was becoming a number of extensions over many, many years that you can't really tell what's old and new. You know, Maidstone Museum itself, it goes back many years. It's been added to. With this one, you'll know exactly when it was built, and I think that is a good thing in and of itself.
Yeah, I think some of the buildings I like sometimes the hidden buildings, or the buildings you walk past every day. So I know a lot of the old Burton shops have the Art Deco bit above them, so you tend not to notice what's below, or now they're different shops, and you look up and you see that. But also quite buildings that dominate areas. So, you know, in Margate you've got the big concrete tower block, which not everyone likes, but it's just that dominance to the area and the concrete structure of it. Or things like when you drive into Chatham and you go down the Luton Arches hill, and you've got the shopping centre, and there's that big tall tower block there that you see, I think they're offices. So I kind of like those sort of things in a way.
So you that's interesting. So you like the big objects sitting in the landscape, don't you?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Which I suppose is it's quite a strong relationship with kind of the sculptural object that sits in the landscape, which is quite interesting. I think, you know, buildings, when you look at them, whatever, in a sense, they've got to mean something to us. They've got to give us something back, haven't they? That's the point. And for you saying, oh, you like tower blocks, wow, why not? You know, it's great.
And I know one of the things we were going to talk about next was how do we keep our high streets alive?
Well, I don't think there's any easy answer at all, is there, really? But I think one thing that is important is that it's vital that we do everything we can to, because I suppose in the olden days they were really the centre of services, weren't they? Where we went to the bank, you know, the lawyer, the accountant was on the high street, all these kind of things, shoe repairers, everything was there. It wasn't so much goods in a sense. You know, we lived a very different way. And now, increasingly, it seems to me that activity is getting pushed out from the high street into other places, or online, obviously. And the high street has to kind of reinvent itself. But there's so much quality in our high streets, especially in Kent, you know. Can small-scale activity work? You know, can doing simple things like things with traffic, can that help? Can that work? I'd be really interested in hearing people's views on it and kind of initiatives for high streets. I think, the porters thing that happened recently is good, but I think we're going to have to look for more drastic solutions, I guess, Daniel, than that.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, everyone has their own ideas, and I think, there's so many different things. There's big outer shopping centres and an internet shop, and it's so easy with internet, you can just order anytime you like to, and it, comes to you. So I think, there's a lot of different ways and different sort of competing things, and, it's how it works in the future.
Well, I think also one of the key things, you mentioned the larger stores, and obviously there's a major issue of how we really accommodate larger scale units that seem to be driving modern retail, how we actually accommodate them in smaller scale towns. And surely we can begin to think about how we can work with the people wanting to develop in places, how we can work with them to help shape the high street too. I think they've got to work together. The new development with the existing fabric of the place have to begin to work really well, and obviously that's possible. We know it's achievable through good design. What we've got to do is really work very, very hard with the developers, particularly the retail developers who want to develop, and just work with them, because I'm sure they also want to be I guess as the phrase is, stakeholders in a place. They want to be good neighbours. So I think that's one of the keys to it, Daniel, how we move forward, how we work with the developers.
And one of the people I spoke to was Sarah, and I think she was trying to say, how is the Kent Architecture Centre relevant to her, or how might it be able to help you as an individual, or does it even do that kind of thing?
Well, I think that we'd like to help everybody. I mean, the whole point really about the Kent Architecture Centre is it's about supporting a better built environment. The way that we do that mostly, I suppose, though, is advising on projects. Now, obviously, they affect everybody in the end. They affect individuals. But through at the other side of the scale, the more I guess directly for the individual, we're involved in a project called Creative People and Places, where we very much want to support and help local people with great ideas for shaping places. We want to help them do exactly that through creative activity. And at the end of the day, changing a place, having an idea for it and changing a place is a very creative act first and foremost. Yeah, there's a lot of practical stuff as well that follow it, but you've got to have the right idea to begin with, and that's very much what we want to do through Creative People and Places. In fact, it's the whole ethos of Creative People and Places is getting everybody involved in creativity.
Now, another one, we had a text come in, and this one was asking, do you get involved in saving Pacific buildings, old buildings that are perhaps important to the local community? And I wonder whether this one come from, I know recently there was a water tower in Sheerness that people wanted to save. It doesn't actually say that, but it could have come from that. Do you do that?
We've been involved in lots and lots of projects involving older buildings. It's it's a really interesting area, and what we do. I mean, Kent Architecture Centre, we don't do the design work ourselves, but we support the quality of it. And I guess one of the most important things that we do with historic buildings, or buildings that just older buildings that really matter to people, is we work out the best way of changing them, the best people that might help to change them, i.e. the architects or whatever, and then we help the client group, often who probably have very little experience of architecture and hiring architects and things. We help them through that kind of process. So yeah, no, we absolutely do that kind of work, Daniel, and really enjoy it.
We got one from Tony in Sheerness, and he was asking, do you give any advice to public buildings or new schools when they're being built?
Yes, we do, Daniel. It's a lot of our work is about really design advice for large and small schemes. There's a lot, surprisingly, there's still a lot going on in Kent in terms of larger developments. Not necessarily all being built yet, but a lot of planning applications that need a lot of care and attention. About 11 years ago, we set up a thing called the Southeast Design Review Panel, and design review is actually a really constructive process of a group of experts, design experts, built environment experts, who help a local a development team and advise the local authority on what the quality of a scheme in the very, very early stages of its development are. What does that panel think of the quality of that scheme? It can happen a number of times over the life of that project during its design development before it even becomes a planning application. And the value is that if you do it early and you do it constructively, that design advice can really transform the quality of a scheme. It doesn't mean that the architects haven't got it right. It's just that sometimes there's a better way of doing something that a third party might see that I guess the design team might not. And that kind of advice is invaluable to a local authority. And Swale Council have committed to getting the quality of development right, and asked us to set up an initiative called the Southeast Design Panel in Swale. And that's a local design review panel, especially recruited with some great people on it, all of whom really know and are passionate about Swale. And they meet whenever there's enough schemes to review. It's only just been set up, but we've already carried out several reviews of schemes. And up to now it's working very well. We want to do more, of course, but we can see everything from housing schemes, schools, retail projects, town centre projects. Any project that needs reviewing, we can review, and we're very interested to hear from people in the community who think that there's a scheme that justifies a design review. And if you do, talk to us about it. We'll give you, of course, all the contact details at the end of the show.
And this one came in from Jim, and he was asking, do you have any architectural say in new buildings being built, new houses, and what do you think about new houses as well? Well, housing. Now, where do you stop? Well, we certainly do. We as an organisation, through our design review, get involved in a great deal of housing, but and advising on housing schemes, large and small. The housing is one of the most thought-provoking and emotion-provoking topics around, I think. Where housing is built, what it actually looks and feels like, are two of the most important things to everybody, I think, that live in Swale and wider in Kent. No doubt about that. We get involved in a lot of advisory work on it. We also get involved in helping to select design teams for housing. It's very, very important. There's actually a lot of great architects out there who can design very, very good housing. So we help developers particularly select the right people who really want to work with a site and a community and have got design skills that will do justice to it. And we've had a great deal of success with that. Now, talking about new houses, I was just thinking myself, actually, while you were talking about that, and I sometimes think that there's lots of new houses being built, and when you see those new houses inside, they're lovely and modern, but on the outside they're trying to replicate something of the past, especially when you see sometimes windows being bricked up to try and replicate that time when I think there was a tax on windows and they had to be bricked up, which I'd imagine at the time was quite a miserable time for people, and now we're kind of replicating that, and that always seems a little bit strange to me, I think.
I think the truth is that these houses, for whatever we say, people buy them. And house builders often say, well, why do we change when we know that we've got a product that sells? The thing is, of course, the housing market is very rarefied. When you buy a house, it's quite an extreme thing. You probably have to buy a house at some point because you've got to move for a new job or whatever. So actually, even at any point in time, your choice is actually quite limited quite often. Particularly now, of course, because we're simply not building enough houses. But I think I'm with you, Daniel. I think that the reality is that we should be much more adventurous in our houses. We don't need to go flat out back into modernism by any means, but we do need to think, well, how do we let light in really well? How do we get great views? And above all, how do we think about energy for the future? How do we think about things like flood risk? An interesting thing recently on the TV, well, not that recently, a couple of years ago, Alain de Botton showed people from an English housing estate around some quite adventurous Dutch housing, and they couldn't get their heads around it at all to begin with, the external appearance, because it didn't look to them like a house. But once they were inside, they got the sense of space and light and the views and the way that you could live in a more contemporary way. They really liked it. So that made them think again about, well, actually, maybe the outside doesn't look so bad after all. So I think it's a bit of a loosening up, I think, about attitudes about housing.
Yeah, I sometimes think it is a fear factor on the people building it. They know that sells, so they keep on doing it. But also, think sometimes things are built for the short term, and housing is such a long term. There's houses about they're 100 years old, 200 years old, and these new buildings that are built, we're going to be left with them for years to come. And I know if you built something new, you'll be left with that, but it is a big commitment. There's so many new houses being built all in this old-fashioned style, and that's going to be about for years and years to come. And I think that's something that isn't, well, I feel sometimes isn't always thought about. And also, what's needed. You just hear people say, we need more smaller houses, but we might need that now. But what happens in 20 years' time when people might want bigger houses? All those smaller houses, are they going to be left empty and derelict because no one wants them? And the same if you build two bigger houses, you could be left with them. And it's sometimes things are built for now because that's what sells, that's what makes money. But I think you do have to look long term, because housing is such a long term thing.
You're right, but the truth is, if you think about a lot of standard, and I use that word, it's standard housing, really, Victorian standard housing, and Edwardian standard house types, the typical terrace. They're all over the place, and we kind of grow to love them after a time. In a sense, as long as it's good, it can be standard. That's okay. But what's important is that they're built very well, and they're robust, and they can take a bit of knocking about internally. If you think about all the terrace houses that have been knocked through, extensions built at the back, they're very adaptable, and I think this is incredibly important. And one of the key things, I suppose, is how adaptable is modern housing to as you said, changing needs and changing circumstances.
We were talking about new architecture. I know there was some other areas you wanted to cover, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that I think we recognise, and everybody should recognise, that building houses isn't easy. Getting planning permission isn't easy. All these things, and it is a high risk kind of business. So, but the reality is that I think there's still a role for good design in all of this, and particularly whatever the house looks like, good urban design. I guess that sense of place. That can you find your way around it easily? Is there a place where everyone can go and meet? All these kind of really good fundamentals of what makes a great place to live in. I think that is absolutely crucial before the look of it, the style or whatever of the housing. I mean, I take your point absolutely about the kind of why aren't we more adventurous? But actually, I think a lot of it has to do with, are we making a good place? And that then can we feel proud of it? And I think no one wants to make a bad place, absolutely not. So I think it's a question of, can we also work with more of the house builders to think, well, how can we create a place that people really, really love for years and years to come? That's the challenge, I think.
Now, I know you were also asking people to contact you from the Kent Architecture Centre, and I know you had somebody asked you a question that they wanted covered this evening.
Great question from Emma about really the role of planning and development, the relationship between planning and development. One of the key things that local authorities at the moment are doing are producing things called local plans, and they really set out where development can and can't happen through allocations of sites. And we tend to get involved, we do occasionally get involved in helping with local plans or advising on local plans, but mostly we get involved when the actual plan's been produced, and we get involved in reviewing a particular project for a site. Now, of course, if there isn't a local plan, Emma's question, which is very good, is what do you do when someone wants to build on a site or select a site and get, putting a planning application. Reality is there's very little that you can do if you own a site. Anyone can think about how they might want to develop that site. In many ways, I don't know, City of London, for instance, that's how it developed. There was almost no planning, but it kind of worked because there were some basic ground rules. I suppose the issue is, how do we think about the quality of that place and reinforcing the quality of that place? And then how can the local authority work to make sure that it relates to other developments? But it's very, very, very difficult when it's speculative. It's very difficult, Daniel, to make it work in that way. So it takes a lot of hard work from everybody working together, and I think that's the key thing. And the key message is local authority, the community, and the house builder or the developer, landowner, working together to produce something that's good and relates to its neighbours, present and future.
Yeah, I sometimes think that is when it grows, saying about how London's grown. You often find that the housing areas that have grown slowly, they just seem to work. And I think sometimes you think that when you see housing estates that are all built at once, it never quite captures that. But then as time goes on and people change and move and things are done to the houses, it starts to grow and become the people's place. And it's a job to capture that in a new design sometimes.
It is, but again, I think that comes back to good urban design. I think that really is about making sure there is proper public space in the right location, that the streets work as well, that there are places that people want to be in rather than simply have to be in, because they've got to pass through them. It's really thinking about the joy of a place, I think, that is absolutely crucial to this. And whilst there's no real substitute for time, because architects don't make places, people do. So it does take time, there's no doubt about that. But what architects and designers and urban designers and planners can do is kind of create the conditions for great places to thrive in, and for people to come in and make them their own.
And we've got one last question that came in, and this one was from Steve in Laysdale, and he was talking about new buildings, and do you think we'll get any more new buildings like the Turner Contemporary that's happened in Margate?
I think, Daniel, the reality is that making something like that happen is a massive undertaking, but the great thing about it is that while there's people around with great ideas, as there must have been behind Turner Contemporary, with a drive and determination over many years to make it happen, then yeah, I really think there will be other buildings like Turner Contemporary around. I mean, it's a European quality building. People come from all over to see it and to experience the art there, and to now visit Margate, which is just great. Regeneration is a slow process. It really, really is, and it'll take a number of years to see the benefit, but it does work, and it does pay off. I think, though, there'll be an equal number, if not more, of smaller key projects that will happen over the next few years. And I think that, it's not just that the government legislation's changed to really help people in terms of right to build and such, that will help people get projects off the ground, smaller projects and community projects off the ground. We'll begin to see the community, I think, taking more control and begin to think, well, how do we adapt this building that hasn't been used for a while? How do we take over this public space and manage it? I think that would be a fascinating thing to see. But there's always going to be the big projects, the important projects that happen. But I think we'd all like to see the community really driving forward change in their local places.
So, Chris, if people would like to find out more about what you do, how can they do that?
They can call us on 01634 401 166. Our website is www.architecturecentre.org. They can follow us on Twitter, and there's a link on our website to that. And they can email me, of course, chris.lamb@architecturecentre.org. And I'd be delighted to hear from anyone who wants to talk about design, place and public space.
Well, Chris, I must say firstly a big thank you to the people that contacted him with some of the questions during the week and this evening. Of course, a big thank you to you for coming along and giving us the opportunity to talk all about the Kent Architecture Centre, but also talk about some of the architectural subjects relating to us here in Swale and Kent.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Daniel, and I hope over the next few weeks, months and years that the team at Kent Architecture Centre get out and meet some of the people that have been asking these great questions and that listen to your show. We know we'd love to do more with the community, and let's hope we do.
Well, Chris, I look forward to seeing you very, very soon here at the Monday Night Community Show.
Thanks, Daniel.
That's Chris Lamb right here at BRFM from the Kent Architecture Centre.